November 12, 1993, McNichol Sports Arena, Denver, Colorado, UFC 1. Opens with a commentator saying that 8 of the deadliest fighters in the world will compete in no-holds-barred combat, which means no rules, no scores, and no time limits. There are unlimited 5-minute rounds tonight, but as though that matters. We go to the arena where Bill Wallace is on commentary, who hiccups after his first words.
I'm Bill Wallace, and welcome to McNichol's Arena. At McNichol's Arena.
He then introduces NFL Hall of Famer Jim Brown, who's accompanied by Jim Brown's hat. I don't know what he has to do with no-holds-barred fighting, but we shall see. Kathy Long is in the DC spot tonight, and Rod Machado is playing the role of Megan O'Leary. He says that his strategy would be to get out of there as quickly as possible, before saying that grapplers will likely have an advantage over the strikers. We'll see how that plays out. We move to the octagon, where Brian Kilmeade details the octagon, telling us what people to expect tonight. But now the time has come for the first fight, Gerard Jordeau versus Taylor Tully, Savat versus Sumo. They're pretty keen to push everybody's individual martial art, I'd assume, to get away from the human cockfighting allegations that would come in later years, but I believe the foundations for those claims were laid here. Tully and Gerard come out, and Gerard has some interesting gestures that, at least here in the UK, would land you in jail. And Rich Goins is going to be our Bruce Buffer for the evening. And as we can see here, 2 athletes in their prime, and look, you've seen this one before. First fight out, Tully decides to run straight at Gerard, falls over, soccer kicked right in the face, and then right hooked for good measure. The referee jumps in, separates them, asks to see the doctor, and then calls off the fight after seeing Tully is fucked up and has blood running out of his eye, to audible booing from the audience and confusion as to why the referee separated the fight. So next we have Zane Frazier against Kevin Rozier, described as adept kickboxers. Even though Frazier is a karate practitioner, Kevin Rozier wants that overhand right. We'll see if he can get it, and Zane Frazier says he thinks that God will make him win. Kevin Rozier looks nervous as fuck, but then Wallace actually makes a good point of why are they having a summit in the octagon when there are no rules to discuss. So Rozier is actually able to uncork that overhand right, and he drops Frazier, who then gets back up and then knees him right in the dick. The referee does nothing, and it's actually here that I wonder, like, does no rules actually mean no rules? Because what is stopping anyone from just dick kicking and eye gouging their way to win every single fight? So a couple minutes into the fight, and these guys are gassed. They're still swinging, but they have absolutely zero cardio. Frazier here has the OG Max Holloway point down before he throws nothing and retreats to the back of the cage, accepts his beating from Rozier, who finishes him with stomps in the corner as his team throws in the towel. They interview Rozier after the fight, who can barely speak, and he ponders why he came out of retirement, while Wallace on commentary says that Rozier is great at taking punishment. We'll see if that helps him in the next round against Gerard Jordeau. Onward we move to Royce Gracie in the gi versus Art Jimerson, who has one hand taped and one hand in a fucking boxing glove. Jesus Christ. And now on top of this cursed visual, we now have the referee from the first fight who doesn't know what's going on, and he's still allowed back to ref this next fight. Anyway, Royce takes down Jimerson because obviously he does. Gracie's wearing a gi, but it's not as though it matters because Art can't grab it because he's wearing a fucking boxing glove, so he can't use it to his advantage. And I swear to God, before I could even say that, Art Jimerson literally taps out without even a submission being put on him. I can't even speak. The referee still doesn't know what the rules are, so there's even more confusion between the fighters, the commentary, and the fans, as Art Jimerson's corner throws in the towel and somehow performs worse than Taylor Tully did earlier in the night. Art doesn't even seem to care as they hug after the fight, and this very much feels as though the fix is in. They then show this other angle, which you can clearly see nothing is happening. He just taps. He just accepts the show money, possibly some other money, and then leaves. Next is Shamrock versus Patrick Smith. Commentators say this is going to be the fight of the night. Smith is the hometown boy with an alleged 250-0 record. He describes himself as the most strongest, so can he use his strength to his advantage? Nope. Shamrock instantly takes him down, sits in guard for a minute before submitting him with a heel hook. In the first semi-final, we have Gerard Jordeau versus Kevin Rozier. Gerard comes out and thankfully left the salutes in the back, and out waddles Kevin Rozier, but the camera pans to Jordeau's hand, which is clearly broke, but he's still able to fight. They shake hands and the fight starts. Anyway, almost instantly Rozier curls up in a ball like Anthony Smith and gets stomped out by Jordeau. He then taps and his corner throws in the towel. He then gets up, but this time he's not out of breath and challenges any kickboxing federation to give him a super heavyweight title fight, seeing as now he's out of retirement, and I sure hope he got it. So the second semi-final is Gracie versus Shamrock, the two biggest names in the tournament. Gracie shoots on Shamrock. We have a scramble before Shamrock ends up in Gracie's guard. Gracie then just starts spamming kidney shots with his heel. Royce ends up on top and finds the rear naked choke and Shamrock taps. Now, Royce knows that he tapped. Shamrock knows that he tapped, so they both sit there looking at the ref who has no idea what he's watching. And he then starts asking Royce, did he tap? Before then asking Shamrock, did you tap? Royce ends up talking to Shamrock as though like, you better tell this guy that you tapped out, but the referee then stops the fight, the two shake hands. But Jesus Christ, how does nobody know the rules of their own tournament? These referees are clueless, which then makes the commentators unsure of what's happening. And then when the commentators don't know what's happening and the referees don't know what's happening, how are the fans of this like new sport meant to know the rules and actually know what to look out for? It just doesn't make any sense. So Jorge and Gracie is now in the octagon to present an award to Helio Gracie, who thanks the crowd and does all the general acceptance speech bingo. But now, thankfully, we are at the end. Jordeau with a broken hand against Royce Gracie. Wallace on commentary is now saying that Gerard may be facing a serious infection after he cut his foot on Taylor Tully's tooth in the first round. This means that in that first fight, Gerard threw 2 strikes, breaking his hand with one and cutting his foot with the other, which Wallace now says needs serious medical attention. Gracie gets Gerard against the fence, he gets the trip, he gets the back of Gerard, he then starts grabbing his broken hand. He's able to get the choke and Gerard taps. Gracie sees the tap and doesn't let go. Gerard is now tapping for his life before the referee then steps in, and Royce Gracie is your winner. He is the Ultimate Fighting Champion and wins $50,000. So Gracie then runs through acceptance speech bingo and he says that he's taking the $50,000 to Disneyland. And with that, this clusterfuck has come to an end. Now, I'm not willing to say that this whole event was fixed for Royce to win. I do find the Art Jimmerson matchup very convenient, and I do find the Shamrock debacle confusing, and then the finals against Jordeau, who has a broken hand. So I don't know if I would call this a rigged event, but I would call this a complete fucking mess. Now, I know that a few of these guys will be back for UFC 2. Thankfully, the referees won't. But if you want to find out how UFC 2 takes this from bad to worse, like and subscribe, and I'll see y'all next time. March 11th, 1994, Mammoth Gardens in Denver, Colorado, home of UFC 2 No Way Out. We start off the show with a propaganda video from UFC 1, which just runs through highlight. Oh, hello, Gerard Jordeau. I can't actually believe that they decided to use Mr. Jordeau's salutes from his fight at UFC 1. But anyway, they show more of the brutality from UFC 1 before then we open to the arena, Mammoth Gardens. Attendance is down from UFC 1, which was 7,800. Here tonight we have 2,000 people. And after having watched UFC 1, I can't believe they managed to get 2,000 people here. Team is Brian Kilmeade and Jim Brown with his very distracting hat. And then newcomer Ben Perry is also here tonight. Commentary ran down that this is a 16-man tournament tonight. Here are some of the matchups that have already happened. The winners in yellow, the losers in white. There is still one fight left to go of the first round, which is Royce Gracie versus Ichihara. So they introduce Ichihara, seeing as he's the newcomer to UFC. They show him doing his karate, and he says that his dream opponent is Royce Gracie. They do enjoy showing these sort of propaganda videos for each martial art. I'm not entirely sure why that is. Yes, probably just because it wasn't readily available to look up at that point. I don't know how strong the internet is in 1994. So G-Man is back and he is our ring announcer again tonight. So the fight starts and Royce gets the takedown as to be expected. And then the Royce Gracie fight begins, folks. We sit here for 5 minutes before Gracie beats Ichihara by nothing. Similar to how he beat Art Jimison at UFC 1, it looks as though Ichihara taps before anything is actually applied here. Neither a triangle choke or an armbar. Ben Perry tries to comment on this after the replay, and even he has to acknowledge that he taps before there's any extension on the arm, but this is put down as an armbar victory for Royce Gracie. We then get to the magnum opus of the UFC production team at this point. They run propaganda videos for each martial art again, and I can't even explain to you what this is. They describe these as the 5 families of disciplines. And they're showing people do moves that we have never seen before in UFC. I mean, this just screams 1994 to me, and I can't even explain why. But look at this shit. They call a discipline exotics. And if anybody can explain this to me, please do so. We have never seen anybody act like this in the octagon. How is this meant to help you win this no-holds-barred contest? And now commentary decide that now is the time to say that this sport is really a chess match. What part of these last events has suggested that this is a chess match? Especially after that propaganda video that you just showed. Oh, and wouldn't you know it, an exotic in our next fight. So Kilmeade says on commentary, a lot of people don't know what an exotic is. And he's right, we don't. He then says, well, you should now after that video. Really? He then asks Perry to explain. And Perry can't either. He just says, well, exotics are anything that aren't a normal style. Anyway, Smith ends up on top of Morris and just elbows the fuck out of him. Now, I gave the referees some grief at UFC 1, but holy shit, Big John was ready to let that man die in there. Didn't even call the fight when Smith got up to celebrate. He gave the corpse of Scott Morris the chance to get back up. Like, hold on guys, he's still breathing. What the actual fuck? Anyway, Smith wins and Scott can't even remember his own name. Well, anyway, we can't grieve forever. So next we have Johnny Rhodes against Fred Ettish. Johnny Rhodes won a 15-minute untelevised fight to get here, and his opponent Fred Ettish is a replacement who looks like fucking Ben Stiller out of Dodgeball. Anyway, he's a 5th degree black belt in karate. And he's down already. Anyway, he isn't finished because Rhodes has some of the worst ground and pound I've ever seen. And I know he's already been in a 15-minute fight, but I mean, come on. And then after this, Ettish doesn't even try to get back up to his feet. He just lies there on the floor and tries to kick the leg. Rhodes ends up managing to get down and take his back and gets him with a choke. And I swear to God, Big John is just waiting until these guys die. This is like Mario Yamasaki level shit. But anyway, Rhodes is into the semi-finals. Next, we have Orlando Veit, and he is taking on Remco. Orlando has a 55-9 record with only 13 KOs. So G-Man is letting us know that Orlando is a decision merchant. Not that that's going to matter here. He goes for a takedown, Remco ends up on top of him, and he just sits on him because he's fucking 90 pounds heavier than him. I'm surprised that Orlando can even breathe with this guy on top of him. But Remco goes for elbows from the top, and Orlando's out almost instantly, and I swear to God, Big John again with this shit. Did he train Herb Dean? Jesus Christ. This shit deserved the human cockfighting allegations. Next, we have Jason DeLucia versus Royce Gracie. Fuck. So Royce gets DeLucia in his guard. Royce then transitions to top where there's a brief struggle and then an armbar. At which point, DeLucia taps instantly. Royce doesn't let go again. Big John is nowhere to be seen. I am so fucking sick of this shit. Royce then breaks his arm and goes to the semi-finals. I am so fed up of this bullshit. Like, look at this. And there's an instant tap. I think the corner had to throw the towel in for John to actually step in and separate this. Look, tap, tap, tap. Nothing. Nothing. Goes to the ground, still nothing. Fuck. So Patrick Smith is in the first semi-final against Johnny Rhodes. And anyway, the fight starts. Rhodes throws a spinning nothing and more of the same for about the next 30 seconds before Smith just kicks Rhodes right in the dick and grabs him in the standing gilly and gets the win. He is into the final. Now, I didn't even notice this the first time, but Johnny Rhodes actually taps with his feet and Big John again just completely misses it. I'm not going to go so hard on him because I also missed it. But, I mean, fuck, you're the referee. Should you not be looking out for this? So, Royce is back and he is against Remco. Now, let's see if Remco will use his 90-pound weight advantage like he did against Orlando to get the win. They credit Remco with being a jiu-jitsu champion, everybody, let's remember this. So, he gets taken down and choked out with his own gi. What the fuck? But you can see that his gi is not round the neck, it's on his chin. So that can now get added to the pile of suspicious Gracie wins. So before the final, we get some Gracie family propaganda as though there is any doubt who's winning this. And here we go, UFC 2, No Way Out, final, $60,000 on the line, Royce Gracie versus Patrick Smith. 20 seconds in, Gracie is in mount, he throws a few straights from the top, and Smith's corner throws in the towel. Tell me this shit is not rigged. They hug and kiss. Patrick Smith was more pissed getting beat by Shamrock in the first round of UFC 1 where there was no money on the line than he is here, and he didn't even give up. The Gracies then spend an awful long time talking to Smith, and it's here that I actually thought, like, if I was a fan just watching this back in 1994, I would never watch this shit again. Royce then plays acceptance speech bingo, thanks his family and says he's going skiing with the $60,000. UFC 1 was a mess, and I put that largely down to the fact that nobody knows the rules, the referees or the commentators. So we got new commentators. Okay, they are better than Bill Wallace, right? And we got new referees, and I have no doubt that Big John became a better referee. But this event, between the bullshit discipline propaganda and the bullshit officiating, and I'm just going to say it, the rigging that Royce Gracie is winning this thing, somehow made this go from bad to worse. They had 2,000 people here for UFC 2, and that's 5,000 down from UFC 1. And I think this event actually killed the town, because for the first time we're leaving Denver, Colorado. We are going to Charlotte, North Carolina for UFC 3, and I'll see y'all next time. We are back with another UFC retro review. We've already done 1 and 2, so we're here with UFC 3, September 9th, 1994. The event opens with a Royce Gracie propaganda video, which shows highlights from UFC 1 and 2. The narrator makes the point of closing the video asking the question, can anybody beat Royce? We come out to the arena and we are out of Denver for the first time. We are now in Charlotte, North Carolina at the Grady Cole Center with 3,000 people in attendance. Ryan Kilmaid is back on commentary and his opening line is that he can't explain the UFC down to each and every detail. That's why the last time we had the exotics discipline. We're introduced to Jim Brown again and his very distracting hat again, who says Royce Gracie's been learning new techniques, which could literally be anything other than laying in guard. Ben Perry is also back. We're back down to 8 fighters from the 16 that took part at UFC 2, thank God. There is also $60,000 on the line for the winner of the tournament. Here they are. From here we go straight into the Emmanuel Yarbrough video. Here he is in the gym practicing his palm strikes and curling the barbell, which definitely has got no weights on it. And I mean, looking at EY right now, he looks ready for the current heavyweight division. We're then joined by Keith Hackney, who comes out, and then we get straight into the tail of the tape. Looking at EY here, he is 6'8", 616 pounds at 29 years old. That is insane. Hackney is 5'11", 200. This is eerily similar to the first UFC fight with Tully and Jordo. Hackney floors EY with an open palm strike before EY then gets back up and throws Hackney through the gate. The octagon's on this platform, so that could have ended very badly for Hackney. Get back to the octagon not long before EY slowly topples over and Hackney throws about 40 uninterrupted strikes to the back of the head before EY then eventually taps and the fight is over. Now, we seen Gerard Jordo break his hand throwing one punch at Taylor Tully at UFC 1. Hackney threw a shitload here, so we'll see how that affects him in the next round. Next up, there's a Ken Shamrock video package where he says that he's here to redeem his loss to Royce Gracie at UFC 1. He comes out wearing shoes, so commentary make a point of saying that he will be unable to kick in this fight. Christoph Leninger comes out in the gi, and on the tail of the tape, the two look pretty evenly matched, with Shamrock being a little heavier. So at the start of the fight, Shamrock ends up in Leninger's guard, and we stay here till about the 3-minute mark. And over UFC 1 and 2, I gave Royce Gracie some shit for his kind of boring fight style, but Shamrock is on fraud watch, to be honest, because he sits in guard a lot. But he ends up getting the back, we get back to guard a minute later, and Shamrock ends the fight with ground and pound as Leninger taps. Quite anticlimactic. So Shamrock's into the semi-finals, and next we have a Roland Payne video, our hometown boy, who's a bare-knuckle fighter, allegedly 27-0 with 24 knockouts. And by the way, Roland Payne is such a good name for a fighter. His opponent though, Harold Clarence Howard, out here looking like a GTA character, is also a great name for a fighter. The fight starts between these two at somewhat of a sprint. I mean, they transition momentum back and forth for about 30 seconds before Harold Clarence Howard absolutely slimes out Roland Payne. And I mean, like, he needs medical attention, but I mean, Howard's not caring, he's through to the semi-finals. Now, before we get to the final first round fight between Royce Gracie and Kimo, I mean, I just have to say this now, this is my main event right here. Like, we go back to commentary, they're kind of looking over Roland Payne for a bit, but this video package here for Kimo, this is my main event. Like, if you haven't seen this, please go watch it, right? But here's Kimo. He believes he's a warrior in service to the Lord. He's a practicing minister, and he travels 6 months of the year to go and preach the gospel, right? He says he's 6'2", 240 and only 5% body fat. Now, I've seen a steroid back right there, right? But they put this in the video package that he plans on administering some chemotherapy on his opponents tonight. Fighting out of Huntington Beach, California, because of course he is. This level of insanity doesn't live anywhere else. He says his purpose is to bring the gospel of Jesus Christ to the whole world. Bryce Mitchell stole this guy's gimmick. And I'm just going to let this entrance play out. Hopefully I don't get copyrighted. But what the fuck is going on here? How is Royce Gracie not dying laughing in the octagon right now? This is ridiculous. Look at this. So Royce Gracie's sitting in here stone-faced. Meanwhile, look at the corner here between Kimo and Joe-son, right? Just talking all this shit. They clinch up against the cage for a minute and a half before Kimo actually ends up on top of Gracie's back. They transition back and forth before Gracie grabs Kimo by the hair, like a pussy, to keep him in his guard. Kimo's actually able to get up before taking Royce down. Commentary is losing their mind right now. They are freaking out that this fight has gone 4.5 minutes. And at that point, Royce is able to submit Kimo with an armbar. Now, this is definitely the toughest fight that Royce Gracie's had so far. But he only really took a few shots in this fight, and he is now getting carried out of here as though he has been shot. Commentary now tell us that Hackney is out after his quarterfinal win. I think he broke his hand. And now Felix Mitchell is in to face Ken Shamrock in the semi-final. Felix Mitchell is a correctional officer and fighting here on 10 minutes notice with one cornerman, while Shamrock is out here with the whole squad. Strange stance from Felix with his hands up very high, just asking for the takedown, but he defends it surprisingly well here. Shamrock looks for the choke, and I just realised that Felix came in here with gloves on and now they are missing. They clinch up against the cage and Shamrock tries to wedgie Felix, who also then return fires and tries to wedgie Shamrock back. Shamrock finally gets the takedown after 4 minutes, gets the back and gets the choke, and he is into the finals. But he is also very, very injured right now. So I think Shamrock hurt his ankle here and he is not going to be able to make the final. And speaking of which, we have our next semi-final. Gracie versus Howard. Commentary are talking here, as they are wont to do, but they then keep talking. And keep talking as though they are stalling. And then we go to a video package from Harold Howard. He says he's looking forward to incorporating the karate into his jiu-jitsu. Okay. So out comes Gracie, walking like he's going to the electric chair. He stands in the octagon, G-Man does the intros, while Gracie looks like he has the worst hangover ever. Before the fight can start, the Gracies throw in the towel and carry Royce to the back. Howard celebrates, and then 2 men run into the octagon. My hero, the absolute #1 hater, 50 cent levels of petty. Out comes Kimo to celebrate with his coach Joe-son. This is so WWF, it's amazing. And the crowd start chanting for Kimo, they love it. What an absolute legend. We see Gary Busey here, probably not too long after Point Break, but it's only for a second before going back to commentary, who are very unimpressed with Kimo because they just love to glaze fucking Royce. Fucking Royce Glazy. We then get highlights from the earlier fights. I think this is just to give them time to find the replacement for Ken Shamrock. But the replacement is found. He is Omaha police officer Steve Jenham, 3rd degree ninjutsu black belt, out here looking like a smacked ass. Just quickly, this is so unfair. I get that Harold Howard didn't really have a second fight, but just the premise that we could get this fresh replacement in who hasn't fought to go straight into the finals and fight someone who could have had potentially 2 fights before this with 60k on the line is just brutal. But here we go, UFC 3, the American Dream final, $60,000 on the line as Harold Howard faces Steve Jenham. Harold Howard starts the fight just fucking button mashing, pulling out a Rolling Thunder straight combination, like out of where. Howard ends up trying to get the standing gilly in on Jenham, but he's able to counter. They go down, they get back to their feet. Jenham ends up getting the takedown again. He gets to mount, throws a few straights, and Howard's corner throws the towel in. What the fuck? This is the same bullshit from UFC 2, was my first thought. But then when they showed the replay back, it does actually look like Howard, well, first of all, asked him to, but then he makes sure to tap out. They hug and kiss. Jenham gets his check, and that right there closes the book on UFC 3. I actually really enjoyed this event, so much more than UFC 1 and UFC 2. Kimo was a big part of that, but I think the actual pool of fighters were so much more likeable than the previous two. We were less heavy on the propaganda videos, the show kept moving. I will say now actually that the production has improved from the first events to this one here. It was good to see that the tournament had 8 people in it compared to 16 from the last time. I think that helped with the crowd too because they weren't so burnt out having to watch so many bad fights. And there's a nice underdog story with Jenham coming in at the last minute to win the tournament. And he will be back to defend his title as the 3rd Ultimate Fighting Champion when the UFC goes to Tulsa, Oklahoma for UFC 4 Revenge of the Warriors. But until then, like and subscribe, and I'll see you all next time. So we are back with another UFC retro review, this time UFC 4 Revenge of the Warriors on December 16th, 1994. Steve Jenham is the current champion, back to defend his title as we open to the city of Tulsa, Oklahoma. We are at the Expo Pavilion Square, or Square Pavilion even, with around 5,800 people in attendance. We are introduced to our commentary team for the first time. Bruce Beck is here, and he is joined by Jim Brown and his very distracting hat. They talk about the revenge that this event is named after, and they talk about how Royce Gracie wants to avenge his first tournament loss, and how Kimo's corner man, competing for the first time, Joe Son, wants revenge for his boy Kimo. Jeff Blatnick breaks down the octagon, and I was hoping that we'd left this behind at UFC 1 and 2, but I suppose it's still a new thing, so here we are again. So for the first time, we have alternate matches. I think after Steve Jenham's win at UFC 3, they thought, this is pretty unfair, and they are pretty right. So our boy from UFC 1, Kevin Rozier, who will get finished in 14 seconds here, Bossett beat Xavier, and Guy Mesger also beat Jason Fairn, although they don't show it here or ever mention it. We'll see if they get called upon tonight. We have the brackets for tonight's tournament, and this is the first time that seeds have been drawn. This way they can hope that the number 1 seed and the number 2 seed can meet in the final, theoretically having beaten lesser competition to get there. I think it goes without saying that Gracie and Jenham are number 1 and 2 respectively. But here we go, Royce Gracie versus Ron Van Cleef, and we are back to this shit. Royce Gracie gets this fucking 80-year-old man to fight first. See, in my last review of UFC 3, I said that I enjoyed that event partly due to the selection of fighters and the fact that Gracie just didn't get a free ride to the final. Well, we are truly back in the trenches, folks. The fix is in, and it is apparent already. Now, don't get me wrong, right? Ron Van Cleef is 51 at this point, and he is in great shape, to be fair to him, but I mean, come on. I do not care how many black belts you have. Like, he has grey hair. Like, the fight starts. Gracie takes down Apollo Creed here instantly, straight into side control, and you guessed it, folks. We are here for the next minute. Before he just gets to mount. Jim Brown the whole time is running PR for Royce Gracie. He sits in mount here for another 2 minutes while he just jabs away at this old man. Van Cleef eventually just gives up his back, and Gracie manages to get the choke for the win. As if there was any doubt about it. But now we actually have something to look forward to here. The next fight is Joe Son, who was in the corner of our favourite Kimo at UFC 3. This guy is 23 years old, by the way, they're saying. He looks like fucking Oddjob from James Bond, right? He's made his own martial art called Joe Son Do, and he's out here with the cross as well. He's doing Kimo's entrance. I mean, just saying, this guy here, look at him with a cross like that. 5'4", 236, by the way. Again, 23 years old. Even although they get it wrong later on in the tail of the tape. Anyway, so Keith Hackney is back after getting injured at UFC 3 fighting Emmanuel Yarborough. So he's back. They end up for the first 30 seconds to a minute or so just kind of, staying at distance, looking at each other. Joe-san does a lot of taunting, as you can imagine here. But Joe-san ends up getting control. He gets on top. He goes for the gilly, which then moves from um, the ground to standing before Hackney is able to then take down Joe-san before just absolutely pounding his balls to smithereens. And Joe-san still won't let go. What the fuck? Right? Now, I cannot explain what happens after that. I'll try, but I can't. Hackney attempts to violate Joe-san by taking his pants off and choking him at the same time. Like, first, I believe women now charge for that kind of service. But again, Joe-san doesn't, like, he does tap, but he still fights it. And Hackney is through to the next round. Unbelievable sportsmanship from Joe-san after getting his balls absolutely pulverized by this man. Hackney broke his hand. That's how he got injured at UFC 3, by punching Yarbrough in the head. We'll see how his hands are after recovering from this demolition of Joe-san's balls. And so we have our next fight, Melton Bowen versus defending champion Steve Jenham, the Omaha police officer. So this fight, I mean, evenly matched here on the tail of the tape, but they literally do not touch for the first minute of the fight before Jenham gets the takedown straight into mount and throws some wild ground and pound. But Bowen is still in here. There are a couple of women in the crowd looking on, absolutely horrified at the scene here. Bowen's able to get back to his feet before getting thrown. Quite nice here from Jenham. And it just hit me here that we have this uniformed police officer right now hitting this black guy with ground and pound and trying to choke him. Thank God, right, that Jenham is able to finish this fight with an armbar, because elsewise this would just be very, very uncomfortable to watch. So we have the final fight in the first round, which is Dan Severn versus Anthony Macias. Anthony Macias, the hometown boy, they always have one at these early UFC events. They've never won, but they're always there. And this poor guy here is about to be fed to Dan the Beast Severn. Between Macias, Roland Payne, Pat Smith, all these guys, these hometown guys, they get fucked up and bounced out in the first round at some point. So I don't have high hopes for Macias right now. But I mean, look at the tail of tape here, fucking £70 difference. But I mean, look, holy shit, this guy is actually able to defend the Dan Severn takedown. I was not expecting this whatsoever. Oh, Jesus Christ, he hit him with a German suplex. Oh, fuck, he just hit another one. Well, it was nice whilst it lasted. Dan Severn gets the choke and the win in just under 2 minutes. He is through to the semi-final. So we get our first semi-final, which is Royce Gracie versus Keith Hackney. But we hear from commentary that Steve Jenham is injured and he will not be able to compete in the next semi-final fight. Now this fight starts and it just looks like two mental folk having a fight in the street for a second. Also, why are the lights flashing on the canvas? I don't know. But they clinch, and Hackney actually starts hitting Gracie on the feet. It's only taken to UFC 4 for someone to try that. Gracie pulls guard, looks for the triangle. But holy shit, Hackney actually fights back, and I am cheering whilst I am watching this, by the way. This is great. Gracie ends up pulling him back into his guard, looks for the triangle again, but ends up finishing Hackney with the armbar. So Royce Gracie is our first UFC 4 finalist. Now, our second semi-final, Steve Jenham is out and Marcus Bossett is in. And I feel really bad for Bossett here because he seems like a nice guy, but again, he too is about to get fed to Dan Severn here, who, by the way, wipes his armpits first and then his face with his shirt. Really? We get to the fight here, and Bossett gets one good kick in before being just fucking pancaked by Dan Severn and subbed with the arm triangle. So our final for UFC 4, Dan Severn versus Royce Gracie. So we have arrived at final time, $64,000 up for grabs. The Revenge of the Warriors UFC 4 final, Dan Severn, Royce Gracie. Gracie's fought for nearly 10 minutes at this point between his first and second round. Dan Severn has only fought for 3 minutes. Severn is nearly 80 pounds heavier than Gracie. We'll see if that plays a factor here. We get 45 seconds into the fight without any contact. Severn decides to jump in, just dives at Gracie's feet, ends up in the guard. And you know where this is going. Already you know where this is going. We're here for about 6 minutes, right? Before Gracie attempts a reverse choke. Nowhere near a finish, right? Nowhere near a finish. We then need to wait until the 10.5-minute mark for Gracie to try a triangle. And that's it. These are all the notes that I have. Nothing happened for the rest of the fight until the finish. Royce Gracie gets the triangle and the win, just shy of 16 minutes. They sat in guard for over 15 straight minutes. And that's your lot, folks. Royce Gracie picks up the $64,000. No interviews, just business. Now, I can't lie. Even though that main event was an all-time stinker, I actually did enjoy this event. There wasn't enough good stuff on here to make this a worthwhile watch. Joseon versus Hackney was hilarious. Dan Severn's wrestling was actually very entertaining until it wasn't. And even Hackney versus Gracie wasn't terrible. I would have liked to have seen more of Steve Jenham, but I'm sure he'll be back. And I'll be back for UFC 5, The Return of the Beast, Dan Severn, and the super fight between Ken Shamrock and Royce Gracie. I'm sure that'll be a barn burner, folks. But until then, be sure to like and subscribe, and peace out. UFC 5, April 7th, 1995, starts with a little highlight package from UFC 1, 2, 3, 4 and 5. Takes us through a little journey of how we've managed to get to this point. We then open to the city of Charlotte, North Carolina, and to a very sad looking Independence Arena, or Charlotte Coliseum for the old time fans here. I don't know why they chose that angle that shows all those empty seats, but anyway, Bruce Beck is on commentary, joined by Jim Brown and his fucking hat again. Jim Blatnick is also here. So UFC 5, Return of the Beast, they run through the rules here quickly. It's another 8-person bracket this time, thank God. And only Dan Severn is a returning fighter in the tournament, with Royce Gracie and Ken Shamrock being in the super fight. And we will get to that super fight later. But our first fight now is Andy Anderson, allegedly 86-0 with all 86 being knockout wins. His opponent is John Hess, who is clearly autistic. He practices his own martial arts, SAFTA, Scientific Aggressive Fighting Technology of America. I wonder if that ever caught on. Hess is a 4th degree black belt, by the way, in a martial art that he made up with no sanctioned record, but he says he's never lost a fight, but he also says he's in tremendous shape. So much technique in the opening exchanges, John Hess literally will not stop poking Anderson in the eyes, and is the most uncoordinated person I have ever seen. But he ends up getting the finish because his opponent is blind as fuck, and he runs a Gracie train straight to the back. Hess would then later get fined $2,000 after the event for his performance, by the way, all those eye pokes. But he's through to the next round, so I doubt he gives a fuck. And for all the complaining that we have about eye pokes now, they were even a problem back here in 1995, and we still haven't found out a way to stop people from doing them. Next up, we have Todd Medina, the first guy to have a Bruce Lee Jeet Kune Do background. And Beck says that he trains with Joe Son and Kimo, who are currently 0-2 at this point, but they are my favourites. But he is another believer and says all his power tonight will come from the Lord. But he doesn't come out with Joe Son, he doesn't come out with Kimo, or have a cross on his back, or a big Bible verse hanging off a sign. So, safe to say, I am very disappointed. Larry Thunderfoot Curitin is a firefighter, right? 26 wins, 23 knockouts. With a name like Thunderfoot, you would think his best weapon would be a high kick, but he's telling everyone to watch out for his straight right hand. Medina shoots right away, Thunderfoot tries a choke, Medina breaks, and then just spams headbutts. Somehow we've shifted to the middle of the octagon here without ever leaving guard. Medina here tries for the Hackney method, misses his dick, but just before putting his forearm on Thunderfoot's neck, headbutting him, Thunderfoot taps before the 3-minute mark. Next up, we have the Russian bear Oleg Taktarov of Bad Boys 2 fame. He was the assistant to the Russian nightclub owner and drug dealer, right? Just as a side note. But tonight, this is his first time in America. He hasn't lost a fight in 10 years. He's a Sambo fighter, and he's out here in joggers and gi combo. Love that. His opponent is clearly on the spectrum. Paramedic by day, fighter by night. Ernest Verdicia is out here with his whole gang of EMTs in his corner. He's a big karate guy. He says his opponent is going to need their help when he's done with them. We'll see how that plays out. Holy shit, Ernest takes down Taktarov. I did not expect that, but wow, this is not what we need with a Gracie and Shamrock fight later. Ernest tries to push the action and loses control. Taktarov lays there before taking Ernest over because he's no idea what he's doing on the ground, so why did he shoot in the first place? Taktarov gets the choke and gets the win in 2.5 minutes. Dan Severn's back, and he's got a whole video package here trying to promote Dan Severn. Not only naming the event after him, UFC 5 Return of the Beast, but they have a lot of highlights of him here in his previous events. They're doing their best to build him up, and Jesus Christ, yes, they are trying their best to give Severn wins here. Look at this fucking guy. Joe Charles from California, he has fucking Timbs on with whatever the fuck else he's wearing. Dan Severn is good enough to beat actual guys without wheeling out the fucking Black Aladdin here, right? So the fight starts, Severn takes down Charles into side control, starts throwing knees at Charles' head, he loses position, they end up in guard, Charles tries an armbar, he tries a triangle before Severn takes his back, gets the rear naked choke on him in brutal fashion, and he advances to the semi-finals. The double take that I had to do when commentary said that Joe Charles was a returning fighter, I was like, no, there is no way I would have forgotten this guy. But apparently he was in one of the alternate matches. They weren't actually televised on the pay-per-view, so they're not on Fight Pass. That's why I haven't seen this guy before. But Jesus Christ, that caught me off guard when he was on the screen. Here are the semi-finalists. John Hess is out, he hurt his hand, and Dave Beneteau is in. He beat his opponent Asbel Cancio in 21 seconds in brutal fashion. Feel free to step in at any point, ref. About now, maybe's aye, maybe's no. Todd Medina is back for the semi-final. He does a half-hour jumping rope, 2 hours of Jeet Kune Do, 1 hour of jiu-jitsu, and then he lifts weights after that. I thought this guy was like employed. Like, this is the daily itinerary of someone who is unemployed as fuck. Dave takes him down, gets into side control, throws a few strikes, gets into mount, throws some more strikes, and Medina's corner throws in the towel in just over 2 minutes. The next semi-final is Oleg Taktarov versus Dan Severn, Russian Bear versus the Beast. We get another video package for Dan Severn before he comes out. It's him in the gym and in an interview where he says he held back in UFC 4, but he will not tonight. Again, he's wiping his armpits first before wiping his face. Like, the order is all fucked up here. I hope it's a new shirt he has on every time. I hope he packs 3 shirts and it's not just all his sweat throughout the night. This lady at the side of the cage is apparently Severn's manager, Phyllis. Severn grabs Taktarov, takes him down, knees to the head, actually throws strikes here with some intent. That's different for Severn. About 2 minutes in, Severn ends up in guard. Taktarov looks for the armbar while Severn drops knees on Taktarov's eye. Whenever he can, Tektarov is bleeding quite badly here. Severn continues to throw punches. Tektarov won't let go of the arm. Tektarov's face is a mess now at this point. He is bleeding badly. John McCarthy calls the fight, and Severn is through to the final to face Dave Beneteau. Commentators seemed really concerned the way they were running through all the medical personnel they have on site here. They said that they have 2 life support units on standby here just in case. Like, I don't know if it's that bad yet, guys, right? In full disclosure here, right, I watched the first half of this event, right? I had to leave, I had to come back. While I was away, I made a thumbnail, right? Now this event, UFC 5, Return of the Beast, the thumbnail heavily featured Dan Severn, right? And then I came back, and then I watched the super fight. And I cannot let these two, right, Shamrock and Gracie, I can't let that slide, right? I cannot let these transgressions against humanity slide without making my point very fucking clear about what I think of these two, right? First, let's look at the positives, right? A new feature of these UFC events is the super fight, right? I love this idea. Gives the two guys in the final a chance to rest before the fight, making it more fair on the guy in the second semi-final. And you get to market a super fight between your biggest names. What would typically happen is the super fight champion would face the tournament winner. In this case, we have Gracie versus Shamrock. Shamrock never won a tournament, but he is one of the biggest names that UFC felt was marketable, so this was the biggest matchup they could make. The context of the super fight here, where UFC get to put their stars against each other, so even if you don't know anyone in the tournament, you can be excited about the super fight, whilst a new star is then made by winning the tournament. This is sort of a precursor to the modern day BMF belt, but the BMF belt is just made in theory for a specific style of fighter, as opposed to just let's get different stars from different weight classes in to make some dream matches like happen at a catchweight. I would love to have seen this for an Alex Pereira Jones fight. I thought it would have been so gimmicky, but to bring back a super fight title, it feels like a generational super fight, so I prefer the sound of a super fight title instead of a BMF belt. I think the super fight idea is fun. Speaking of fun, this fight was not it, right? We have not left guard this entire time, right? I had the Fight Pass live stream on the other night, and they'd put on the 90-minute fight between Gracie and Sakuraba. So my patience for these fights where Gracie and his opponent just nap on the floor whilst Royce throws some kidney shots with his heel, my patience for that right now is through the floor, okay? About the 11-minute mark, I started watching this at like 1.5 speed, and these guys are still moving as though they're in quicksand. Commentators are trying to sell this by saying, in a Rogan style, right, where it's like, this isn't boring, they're just waiting for the other one to do something, they're just waiting to make a move. So he literally said in a roundabout way, folks, these guys are sitting here doing nothing. This made me feel so blessed to have sat through DDP Hamza and Islam JDM. Like, we are eating so good right now, because at least they break them up every 5 minutes when the round ends. I sat through this shit for 30 minutes before the round ended. And then we went to a 5-minute overtime. I am punching the air at this point. Bruce Beck says that this is pure skill on display, and the early boos have stopped. He thinks the people now understand what is happening and they respect the athletes. No, Bruce, they are bored as fuck. They have been beaten into such a submission that they are now dead silent. Joe Rogan posted an old equipment box recently on his Instagram, right? And some guy in the comments was like, oh yes, Royce Gracie, the real GOAT of MMA. I guarantee you this guy has either seen Royce Gracie's name winning these tournaments or heard that he's a pioneer of this bullshit style and thinks, oh yeah, that guy's the GOAT, like he's the hipster's choice of, oh well, if you know, you know, right? I bet you he has not watched this shit with his own eyes. He has not wasted the precious time in his life watching Royce Gracie beat these fucking idiots in the early tournaments and then lie there grabbing his sleeve doing fuck all and nothing against the likes of Severn and Shamrock. Now, I said in one of my last retro reviews that Ken Shamrock was on Fraud Watch because he enjoys just sitting in his opponent's guard way too much. He has never heard of half guard in his fucking life. I said he was on thin ice. Well, the fucking pod of orca whales have smashed the fuck out of the ice that he was on. He is done for. I am finished defending this guy just because I like him. He is also responsible for this complete waste of time. I cannot believe that he gets rewarded with another super fight at UFC 6. But good lord, I already know what's coming at UFC 9. I don't know how I'll be able to cope. Thankfully, this is the last time we see Royce Gracie in the UFC for a long time. He only left because Rorion Gracie, the guy who was setting up these events, he left because he didn't like that they were bringing in time limits. He wanted more of this, right? So, long story short, no, Royce Gracie is not the GOAT. Oh, and by the way, we sat there for 30 minutes, 5 minutes overtime, and they called it a draw. This is the worst fucking fight of all time. I referenced Gracie and Sakuraba fight, right? Which was also bullshit. But at least Sakuraba won that fight. At least you got to see Royce Gracie quit on the stool because he couldn't walk. This was easily the worst fight I have ever seen. And I know we have another Shamrock Severn barn burner in a few events' time, but we'll see when we get there. It cannot be worse than this, can it? Crowd literally would not stop booing and chanting bullshit. The commentary seems perplexed as to why this is happening. They cannot fathom that nobody wanted to watch two guys lie on top of each other doing nothing for over half a fucking hour. I cannot wait for Jim Brown to be booted off of commentary. This guy is insufferable, right? But we have arrived at the UFC 5 Return of the Beast tournament final. $50,000 on the line. Dan Severn versus the alternate Dave Beneteau. There are no points for guessing who wins this fight, folks. They clinch, Severn presses Dave against the cage. After a couple of minutes, he then gets the trip. Severn gets into side control, and he gets the key lock to win after 3 minutes. Dan Severn gets his check, he gets his belts. Commentary cannot help but mention that Royce Gracie beat Dan Severn at UFC 4. Fuck these guys. And that's it, folks. That was UFC 5 Return of the Beast. All in all, believe it or not, I actually enjoyed the tournament. The tournament was probably the best one that they've put together since UFC 3. And the super fight really shit the bed and dragged down what was otherwise pretty good and pretty entertaining. Nothing really outstayed its welcome in the tournament, at least. But my god, the commentary at this point in the game is insufferable. Thank fucking god Jim Brown is so close to leaving us, along with Royce Gracie. So things are about to get better to watch and easier to listen to. Royce Gracie is one of their guys, right, that can draw people to the building. They've positioned him as a name. But now we can get new guys that are hopefully more entertaining to watch. And not to worry, folks, because we are about to get that new star as Tank Abbott debuts in the octagon, and for the first time in the super fight, we will see Ken Shamrock against Dan Severn. But not to worry, this is actually the watchable fight between the two. It is better than the super fight rematch. I mean, the rematch is the one that I'm actually worried about. But until next time, folks, at UFC 6, Clash of the Titans, thank you for watching. Remember to like, comment, share and subscribe, and I will see you all next time.